Welcome everybody, great to be back. Thank you for all the new subscribers joining. It's really great to have you here. This channel is all about living life trauma-free. And I've got a great interview for you today with a dear friend of mine called Sherine Lovegrove, who is an expert in imposter syndrome. We're going to be talking about the connection between imposter syndrome and trauma, while Cheryl talks about her personal story and how she discovered that she had imposter syndrome. Before we get into the interview though, you know I have to sell my soul to YouTube now. Please do subscribe. Also hit that notification bell and give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed the content. Let's get started.
But what imposter syndrome is basically is the persistent lack or belief of your intelligence, your skills, or your competencies, despite the evidence to the contrary. So that's kind of like the typical definition. So it's the feeling of being a fraud or pretending to be someone that you're not. And me, it's really about thinking about it from the perspective of you put your value of your state of being on something that's evidenced outside of you, so on your work and all those sort of things, but you, instead of who you are, which is really quite scary because we're looking at things from outside in, and we're believing and trusting on that as the outside in.
Yeah, I was going to say, can you think of the tipping point where you thought, actually, this is what's going on?
Oh yeah, I mean, the biggest thing was that I was busy writing a book, my second book. The first one I hadn't promoted, not at all. And I realized when I started doing the second book that I would do the same thing. I wouldn't promote. And I realized it was because I was feeling as though I was a fraud. I was feeling that if somebody saw my work, they would criticize it. And that would have serious ramifications. And so therefore, I had based all this thing on who I was as a sense of my work rather than me. And I just saw that if I came short, that would be like the end of me. It would be the end of me. It was just really ridiculous. That was the fear that was there. It was so strong. Yeah. So for me, that was the kind of tipping point where I thought, oh my God, look at all the things I've done in my life. And this has been run by this fear that's been running my entire life, even though I thought I was a confident person. I really thought I was. And actually, there was this person that was living and showing the world something, but inside feeling incredibly afraid of being found out. Yeah.
This is an interesting conversation. What you've just said about you thought you had a lot of confidence. I think women do have a lot of confidence, but it's the self-esteem and self-worth, not necessarily the confidence. Do you see them as separate things or do you see them as one?
Woo. Okay, that's interesting. I think that, self-esteem is you valuing yourself against something else, and you're either deciding you're below it or you're above it. And that will give you a feeling. So I think self-esteem is the analysis or the evaluation that you make, and the confidence is what is the response to that. So you'll either feel good because your esteem is high, or you'll feel bad or lack of confidence because your esteem is low. But it's based on that ability of thinking that you are either good or bad, or you are better or less than. Yeah, I think that. So I don't see it as the same thing. I see it as one as a result of the other.
Yeah, it's interesting that a lot of women I've worked with, they have the confidence, but they don't necessarily have the self-esteem or self-worth, but they are confident.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Because we can be confident, we can be super duper confident in one thing and so unconfident in another.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so tricky with imposter syndrome. It's so tricky because we can't understand how I can go and do this, and this. If you look at the imposter syndrome, there's something called the Superwoman or superhero. And basically they are the capability people that do everything. They do everything for everyone. They're kind of like a people pleaser, but they do everything for everyone. And they are pretty confident. And they'll even say, I can do this, I can do that, I can do that. But then when you ask them to do things for themselves, go and write a program that's going to promote themselves, they haven't got those structures. They've got structures for everybody else, but not for them, because they're living their life in the context of somebody else. So, you can be very confident, which is why I couldn't understand, because, I was a nurse. I was making major decisions as a nurse I'm a therapist and I'm making major decisions, but yet go and stand on stage, go and do other things. And I wasn't as confident. It's crazy. So it seemed in two different contexts, I was two different people.
Yeah. I used to constantly say to myself, why am I not getting this? Why am I not getting this? I would cry. I just could not get why I didn't get it. I couldn't get it.
Yeah. And it is this thing of, we're basing something on who we are. So when we can see the evidence that we can do this, and this for others, we feel quite proud of that. And because we're so disconnected from ourselves, because we're literally living somebody else's life in a way, because we're doing for other, that we don't really feel our own feelings in a way that's resourceful. And so when we do come back, we don't have a reference, a structural reference or internal reference for our emotions. And so when we do, we just kind of go down that hole. We go down the black hole for a bit.
Relearning.
So, yeah. So it's a really interesting thing. And I mean, someone said to me, that sounds like imposter syndrome. And I said, I do not have imposter syndrome. And then I started to really look at my story, and I thought, oh my God, so many things have shown me where I have imposter syndrome. And it really is very much about competition on some level, because we're kind of moving into the world where it's more sort of the competition part of the masculine aspect of ourselves. And we go into that outward drive rather than going into the internal drive of that feminine aspect, which is the state of being and intuition and knowing. And we're very good at intuiting other people, but not so good at intuiting ourselves.
Yeah, for sure. Guilty.
It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. But, this is part and parcel, and why it's probably more so with women, although it is a case that men do have it. I do think it's different, because for women, it is about who they are, whereas for men, it is about what they do. And that's really interesting. And so we're kind of swung into that role of putting our self-esteem and our worth on our doing rather than our being.
Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating what you've just said. Gosh, that makes so much sense. And this actually, I think, falls quite nicely into, do you think there's a link between trauma and imposter syndrome?
Oh, yeah, definitely. But when I looked back to my trauma, and just like you, I know that, your book's coming out soon. Trauma is at the core of it, because I think that depending on the kind of primary care that you had in those very first years, definitely will determine how you are. And I think, when you're that young, you don't have an ability to make sense of the world in the same way. So you have to make you bad, or you have to make you a particular being in that state, and you overlearn those structures. So for me, in my situation, I was terribly fearful, because my mother, I got hidings, and I mean, they were serious. And my mom was also slightly not constant in the way. She was a little bit chaotic in the way she offered this situation. And so what I had to learn was how to anticipate her all the time, anticipate that. And she was a perfectionist. She was always on about me having to be the best in class. So I was kind of driven that the only way I could people please or please her was that I would do incredibly well at school. Yeah. And even then, after I did that, my brother, who was dyslexic, and I think like you too, he didn't do very well. but all the attention was on him. So even though I was constantly doing this and trying to be perfect, I never, after a while, that kind of sort of went on the wayside because he was taking this attention. But that pattern was still there. And I kind of felt quite good about being perfect. I got really good at being intuitive and helping people, and those kinds of things. So they became me, essentially. And actually, I found it very hard to not say no. I found it very hard to do, I was doing all these things and I really struggled because I was adding more and more and more things. And my history is I would chase class after class after class after class. I have qualifications. I've got so many courses. I can't name. And basically, the incredible thing is once they were finished, you have a moment of, it's done. And then you're on to the next one. You're on to the next one. And you just never get time to just go, wow, you did really well. Wow.
I know we've spoken about this before, and there's a case study in my book which is of Sherine's story. And I remember you saying that your mum was just in competition with you all of the time.
Yeah.
And it's like that trauma it gets so ingrained in your personality and identity that it's until you realize what's going on, are you able to actually separate the trauma from who you really are.
And I think, and it was really quite funny because while I was younger and while I was doing things, until I sort of did my intensive care, basically everything was going swimmingly in a way with regards to doing well. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the first time I experienced the embarrassment of not doing as well as I thought I did, and everybody knowing, that was like the worst thing I could ever experience. Mm. I mean, it was literally, I didn't know where to hide my face. I didn't know, because people actually were commenting saying, well, we thought you would do better. And actually what they didn't say was come up and say, oh my God, how awful for you. Mm. That must be really hard. What can we do to help you? If really? They had done that, that would have fixed that trauma a little bit.
Yeah.
But after that, I hid. I started to hide. I wouldn't go and do the things. I wouldn't show myself in the way that I should have. Yeah.
Well, they just reinforced it, didn't they?
Yeah, because they reinforced the critical voice of my mother that was there. But that's the voice I was carrying, that internal saboteur, constantly, that judge, always there. Yeah.
How can you then combat imposter syndrome?
Well, first of all, you've got to recognize you have it. I suppose it's like in AA, you've got to say, I'm an alcoholic.
Yeah.
You've got to be able to say,
I'm a trauma recovery.
I'm a trauma. Yeah. And I think what we have to understand, and which was really interesting, is even if you can have imposter syndrome, even if you haven't been traumatized as a child in the typical sense, you can be traumatized just because of the way you interpret things in life in general. And if you haven't told anybody about it, for them to normalize it, then as a child, you can't reconcile those feelings. So the thing is, you first of all got to recognize it. And then you've got to start to look at your story. You've got to start to look so that you can truly look at it and see it from the perspective that this was something that happened and, you didn't know as a child. You didn't know. You just had to make sense. You had to, you're a survivor. Basically, you are a brilliant, wonderful, fantastic, magnificent survivor. And actually then to look at it as a sense eventually is to really look. For me, I had to learn to go, you know what my mother did was wrong. Mm. Okay. And so for a while I had to kind of be with that, to really allow myself to get strong. I had to get strong so that I could then look back at my mother and look at her and go, oh God, really appreciate her story and see why that happened for her. And it was really interesting, Wendy, was when I was already doing some stuff which was more forgiveness and looking at it as a real heartfelt thing of my mom, I found a certificate that my mother had when she was had just done her typing thing, and she told me that she had always done incredibly well, and here she had just passed. I've never seen this certificate. It's been sitting in these photographs that I brought back from home. And this particular day, while I was doing this particular technique, I opened the screen and I thought, oh my goodness. And instead of thinking, well, I immediately thought, oh my God, no wonder she must have felt the same feeling I felt. And that was an eye-opener for me, because then I could kind of start that process of understanding what was driving her, even though, and I also recognized that it didn't make it made it what she did wrong, but I could understand what was going on. And I think that I was able to resonate, sit with that and be able to hold it in a space of kindness and love. And actually, I kind of grew to love my mother more again. Whereas for a while, I was really very angry. So once I was able to do that, it made a very big difference in my life. Yeah.
It releases, I think, when you move into that space of love, compassion, forgiveness, when you move into the color of a situation.
Yeah.
I was always one end or the other, Actually, I was just one end, hate. That was all that existed. Stress, hate. When I learned to get into the middle and move across to the other side, then, oh God, life just became so much easier.
Yeah.
So different.
Yeah. And, it's really interesting when the Buddha said, go to the middle path.
Yeah, it's so right.
We have all these teachings, all these deep, deep spiritual teachings, which everyone seems to think is, a single person, but actually they're more than that. They're actually people that have moved beyond, and they've got rid of the ego, and they've started to rebirth themselves in a new way of being. And that's what this is about. This is about being able to rebirth ourselves in a whole new way. And so, yes, we still acknowledge that imposter syndrome, but also it becomes a mission, doesn't it? Because it becomes the gift. And you start to realize that part of how we're going to move forward into this next consciousness is we have got to be focusing on getting as many people recovered.
Yeah.
Many people recovered and resilient, because this is all the karma we're carrying. We're carrying this energetic karma that or memory, or whatever resonances we have, whatever we want to say it is, we're carrying it. We carry our parents' stuff. We carry our parents' stuff, all this intergenerational stuff. We carry our evolutionary past. And until we can free ourselves of a lot of that, in the essence of being calm, because the moment we're calm, we start resonating differently. And so when we change us, the world changes in alignment with that, doesn't it?
Yeah. Absolutely. I'm absolutely with you there. I'm with you. I'm on the mission with you. We're just doing it our own ways.
Yeah, exactly.
That's fine.
My work works a lot with trauma,
as
is yours. And, we both know that at the heart, that's where it is. We've got to get back to the self. We've got to get back to the place of source of power.
Yeah.
And we've got to know who we are.
Yeah.
And love who we are.
Sherine, what was the name of your last book?
Oh, Hiding in Plain Sight, No More.
Have you got a copy there? You can wave.
Oh.
That'd be no then. Wait 1 second. Yay! Awesome. Brilliant. And
there we are.
Amazon?
It's on Amazon, yes.
Brilliant.
Yes.
Fantastic. Yes. So I'll pop the link below this video. How can people get hold of you?
Well, they can get hold of me either on LinkedIn, on Facebook. They can go on my website, which is sherinelovegrove.com.